Okay, I think we should be good to begin. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I also really want to apologize that I don't have a camera today. For whatever reason, Zoom is a black box that continues to elude me. Okay. So thank you everyone for coming. Before we begin, I would like to do a quick land acknowledgement. I am coming from the University of Victoria, and we would like to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and the Wasanich peoples, whose territory the university stands on and whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. We do encourage everyone who's coming from anywhere across Canada, from the United States, anyone who's here to learn about residency applications, to check out whose land their university stands on. And to find out about that. I cannot move slides. There we go. Okay. We are the Comp Student Council. We're part of the Education Subcommittee, essentially, and we are involved in student and trainee interests in medical physics across Canada. It's our mission to do a variety of things. This includes, we advise the Comp Board on matters that are important to student members. We assist Comp in attracting student members, but we also organize a lot of social, academic, and professional development events, including the one you're sitting at today. And that means that we're trying to help create a strong and healthy student community, and we hope you guys get the resources you need. This includes things like, if you've ever been to the Comp annual scientific meeting, we organize Student Night Out, the Young Professionals Workshop, the Canadian Residency Fair, and Science Spoken Succinctly. Also, we're trying to get a student spotlight up and running. So for all the students across Canada, anyone in your lab, whether that's your friend or even yourself, we want to share the work that you've been doing because we know you all work really, really hard, and we'd like to share your publications. We want to give you guys visibility. So if you have a friend or even yourself, you are more than free to submit your papers or information about yourself, and we'd love to showcase you on our social media. And of course, we do these Comp Career Catalyst seminars. So thanks for coming out today. Okay, so for today, we're looking at residency applications. So far, we have opening remarks, and we have two presentations presented by Heather Warkentin and a presentation by Dr. Thomas Mann, a resident at Toronto. Then we have Q&A with speakers, including a resident from BC Cancer, Dr. Kyle Broma, and then we'll finish off with closing remarks. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. If everyone could please mute their mics during the talks and during questions, that would be great. Feel free to unmute your mic and raise your hand during the panel period. That is totally fine. But also, you're more than welcome to drop questions in the chat or send messages to the moderators personally. That's also fine if you don't feel comfortable raising your hand. The last thing is that this session is recorded and it will be shared on YouTube. So just keep that in mind if that is a relevant feature to you. So thank you for that. And I'd like to pass it now to Kim, who will introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Jade. And sorry, I did notice we misspelled Heather Warkentin's last name in the slide, so sorry about that. Not in the poster, but in the slide. But yeah, so welcoming our first speaker of the day, Heather Warkentin is a senior medical physicist and the program director for the Cross Cancer Institute residency program in Radiation Oncology Physics. She is a member of Comp Education Committee as the chair of Comp National Residency Program Director Subcommittee. So Heather is an active volunteer with AAPM as a former member of the work group on periodic review of medical physics residency training and a current members of Radiation Oncology Medical Physics Education Subcommittee. Beyond that, she's also enrolled in Western University Doctor of Education program in education leadership, which has been a very exciting new adventure for her in lifelong learning. So whenever you're ready, you can share your slide and begin.
Thanks, Graham. Let me just make sure I get the right one here. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to give you the program director's point of view. So please keep in mind that the programs and program directors are all unique. So I'll do my best not to steer you wrong, but I can really only tell you facts about my own. I'm going to focus on how the programs differ and why they might be differing and give you a little bit of insight into why that might be, because I'm sure you've all noticed that we ask for different things. So I'll touch on the program formats and also a little bit about the application process, but Thomas is going to cover that really thoroughly. So I will focus more on sort of the whys rather than the hows. So where to start if you're not already a regular visitor to the CAMPEP website, I encourage you to get familiar with it. So it's more than just a list of accredited programs. You have access to all the information that the program directors have access to with respect to what's required in a program, both in the standards for accreditation, and there's another section that's the process and procedures, which is also really relevant to the residency programs. At the top, pay attention to these symbols. There's one that indicates institutions that are accredited but found to be non-compliant. So if you see that, it offers a public disclosure statement on the website, which tells you pretty much nothing. So if you're interested in a program that has that little symbol on it, please just reach out to the program director, because it might be a problem that's already resolved and CAMPEP hasn't updated their website yet, or it might be an ongoing program that will impact you as an incoming resident. So don't be shy about asking the program director about that, because it's public information and they should expect that you've seen it. So in terms of program formats, every program will have fundamentally a rotation format, and they'll cover that curriculum that CAMPEP lays out for us. But you're going to see big differences across the country in how they split things up between rotations. For example, one province has a 1-year rotation that's just external beam, and everything that falls under that category is covered in that single rotation. But other programs might have the exact same curriculum split between, say, 6 rotations. And then correspondingly, the duration of each rotation will be different. In terms of overlapping rotations, some programs will have a very rigid set of rotations. So say you're in a brachy rotation, you'll be doing brachy and nothing else for that time. And other programs might have you doing multiple overlapping rotations at the same time. When it comes to rotation mentorship, there are sort of 2 basic models. There's that preceptor model where you're assigned to a person and that individual will teach you everything like that they're responsible for in the clinic. And then there's another model where you'll have somebody assigned to maybe supervise your rotation, but what's taught within that rotation could be taught by any member of the faculty. That latter one is more common in medical physics residencies, but you do see both. Evaluation processes will vary across the country. So you might have an oral exam every 2 weeks. You might have one every 3 months. You might have them at random intervals when you complete rotations. There's a big variation in how hands-on the programs are. So some will immerse you in the clinical work of the department. So you're considered really a contributing member of the staff who happens to also be a learner. And other programs will have you predominantly categorized as a learner and not having as much, like, say, sign-off authority on things. And that's mostly a function of how they've interpreted the supervision guidance guidelines that you can find. Say, like AAPM has a practice guideline for that, for example. Some are affiliated with universities, some are not. In terms of that, you might want to ask if they require tuition payment, because some programs will require you to pay tuition, and that'll be based on whether or not you're taking courses from the university. And the didactic course requirements will vary in terms of how many courses you're taking relative to how much hands-on work you're doing. It all links together, right? Something you might not have thought about before is how the resident positions were created in the very first place. So it could have been 20, 25 years ago, will impact the hiring process that you're going through as a resident in 2024, 2025. So Thomas is going to give you lots of information about the actual application process. So I'll just focus on these little tidbits you might not know. So it's really, really difficult to convince an administrator to create an entirely new funded position, especially if it's for somebody in a learning position. So a lot of department heads in medical physics will have built their resident positions out of staff positions that are already allocated to their department. So maybe they had a budgeted position for a role that they no longer need in the department, like a manager of a technical group or something. And they were able to convert that into a resident position. So that's how we got at least one of our positions in Edmonton way back like 20 years ago. So if this was how the position was created, chances are it's on the books with the organization as a permanent ongoing position. So not that 2-year term position, but it would be classified as a non-medical physicist position with a lower salary assigned to it. And therefore you can't just convert it to a higher paid physicist position when you complete your CCPM exam. So you would have to then reapply for like your real grown-up job after you finish your CCPMs, be that wherever a job opening happens to be. There's one province where you'll be hired as a resident into a medical physicist position, and that's actually a permanent medical physicist position because the province hasn't created a separate job category for the residents. Now, if you think about it, if you're in that province where you're hiring somebody permanently, they're going to be with you for the rest of their career, possibly. You might have a different approach to the hiring process than if you're hiring somebody for a fixed 2-year trainee position. So when you're applying for jobs, keep that in mind and maybe tweak your application a little bit to suit that like long-term approach versus that 2-year approach, because that third category is becoming a lot more common as provinces really acknowledge that resident positions are important, and they create unique resident positions that have a 2-year term. You know that the application process varies widely if you've looked into this at all by now. Some of us are in the match, some are not. I'll talk about that in a minute. Some of us ask for transcripts and some just want, say, verbal confirmation from your supervisor that you've completed all of your degree requirements. Deadlines and start dates are all over the map. My personal opinion is that's good because people graduating from graduate programs graduate throughout the year. So if residencies only start on, say, July 1st, and you happen to graduate in August, then you have to wait a year to start. So I like that we can scatter it throughout the year. A lot of places want you to give that job talk. Some people want reference letters up front. Some prefer just to speak to the references for people that they've shortlisted. And then the interview format and style, Thomas will cover a bit more, but that's all, of course, all over the place. But I get asked a lot, why aren't all the programs in the match? So first of all, there's timing. So the match only allows June 1st to December 31st start date. So if you have a position that starts in the first 5 months of the year, you can't be in the match. The predictability of positions. So for a program like mine, my residents can stay in their residency position until they get a job. So I don't actually know when they're going to vacate the position really far ahead of time. And the match requires you to sign up like months and months ahead of time. So I can't guarantee that I'm going to have a job, say, September 1st, because I don't know when they're going to graduate. I mean, I know when they're going to graduate. I don't know when they're going to vacate that position with Alberta Health Services. There's also a fee associated with it, and I know $375 US is not a lot when you consider a healthcare budget, but we're all stewards of our provincial resources, so it's something that you have to keep in mind if it's going to actually be a cost benefit for the organization. And then your employer might actually have human resources requirements that conflict with participating in the match. And so why is there such an interview process differential? Yeah. So I can't tell you why everybody does what they do. But think about this, like the interview format and style is a reflection of the program as a whole. So if the interview panel is large, you can probably assume that there's an enthusiastic faculty in that program. And if there are physicians on the interview panel, there's likely a good relationship and a lot of interaction between the medical physics residents and their counterparts in the radiation oncology or radiology residency programs. So, and then also the questions themselves, right? If they're asking you a lot of questions about teamwork, what your hobbies are, that gives you an idea of what they value as an organization. What are we looking for? Of course, that's going to vary widely. There are different sort of cultures in the different programs. I'm a program that has a large panel, and I like that because everybody on my panel has their own things that they personally value. So before I even allow those panelists to see who's applied for our positions, we'll get together and generate a list of priorities for the position that should be unbiased by who's applied for it. We do this every time because your needs and values kind of evolve and change with time, right? So we do have that standard set of criteria that we're all looking for, but there's room for personal opinion within the panel. So if it's like me personally, I prioritize a resident who's open to learning and who'll be a good colleague for those 2 years plus that they're going to be with us. Someone else on the panel might put more weight on your research record. So there's going to be a difference. A few quick notes about applications. We are receiving way more qualified applicants than we can interview. So back in the old days, I might receive a handful of applicants who have a CAMPEP graduate degree, and I could interview all of them because there'd be like 3 to 5. And now we're getting far more. So you can't just rely on that kind of checkbox like you used to be able to. So use your cover letter wisely. If you're applying to a program that is perhaps in like a less desirable location, like Edmonton typically is, say why you want to go there. Like if you have family there, if you have connections to that city, let it be known in your cover letter. And we also are worried about if you're moving really far from your support network. Residency can be stressful. So people are swayed a little bit by that kind of thing. So make sure you let it be known. Don't keep it a secret. We do a lot of teaching, so don't forget to highlight all of your relevant teaching in your CV and be prepared to answer a question about teaching in the interview. That's something a lot of people forget. I'm going to skip the personal statement one. We can talk about it in the questions if you want. So Thomas and Kyle suggested that I address this. Should you reach out to the program director outside of the formal hiring process? Absolutely, feel free. I often get emails, all the program directors do, we're used to it. Always do your research first though. Don't ask me if there's a position open if I have one advertised on my career services website. That might seem obvious, but it happens a lot. People ask me questions where the information is just right there on the website. And watch your tone, make sure you're being polite. Don't, I've had people suggest improvements to my residency program who've never even been to Edmonton. I didn't really appreciate that. So just be careful. Evaluations I mentioned, but ask them about their remediation process. So if you don't pass an exam, ask them, what are your options for repeating it, especially if there's a final exam. I've heard of people who didn't pass their final exam and they weren't allowed to repeat it. So that's just a heads up. And also a lot of programs graduate you well before your CCPM exam, but do they come back and help you prep for your CCPM exam, especially that oral component where having people ask you questions that you can practice with are really important. And when you're prepping your CV, give it a really critical review from the point of view of a hiring person. So if you have, say, a non-standard pathway into medical physics, if you maybe don't have as many publications as somebody else or as typical for the degree that you've earned, address that in your cover letter because like I said before, we're getting a lot of really qualified applicants. So you don't want to give them a reason not to interview you because the key is to get into that interview, right? And Thomas will tell you to talk to the current and former residents, but really talk to those former residents because they have nothing left to lose by telling you the truth about the program. And you want to know what it's like. Are you treated like a staff member? Are you treated like a student? Do they value work-life balance or do they want you to work all weekend, every weekend? And that's everything I wanted to cover. I hope you'll have a lot of questions for us. And I wish you all the best as you navigate this residency application process. I know it's really stressful, but hopefully the program directors will do what they can to help you out with it.
Thank you so much, Heather, for such a wonderful presentation about what's happening the other side of the matching program. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions from the floor later. So before we hop on to the question session, we have another presentation that is given by Dr. Thomas Mann, which is a second-year resident at the Sunnybrook Odets Cancer in Toronto. So Dr. Thomas Mann completed his PhD in medical physics at the University of Calgary. His research focused on guiding clinical decision-making and improving efficiency through the use of automations and scripting. So applications he developed during his PhD are being used regularly at the Tom Baker Center for stereotactic radiosurgery treatment planning. So his current research involves small margin weakly adaptive radiotherapy for glioblastoma patients on the 1.5 Tesla MR Linux. In his free time, Thomas enjoyed choral singing, ultimate frisbee, volleyball, and visiting local craft breweries. So whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
All right, thanks for that introduction. I'll just get sharing here. And swap. All right, is it showing up?
Yep.
All right, so I will follow up with kind of the resident perspective of the match itself and some other thoughts that I have on choosing a residency in general. So just to start off, I'm going to briefly describe my medical physics journey. So I started my CampEP Master's of Science at the University of Calgary in 2017, transferred to PhD with a completion timeline around spring of 2023. So I entered the 2023 MedPhys match. So my priorities were to, number one, stay in Canada. I wanted to experience a different work environment because I'd spent a lot of time in Calgary at that point. I wanted to expand my medical physics network and also see new things. So when I was applying for residencies, I actually applied for everywhere in Canada but Calgary, interviewed with 5 programs and matched with Sunnybrook. So in terms of my priorities, the first 2 were just achieved by not going to Calgary, but I also got to see many new things because at Sunnybrook we have the Gamma Knife Electa Linux and Halcyon, etc. So lots of new things to see here. So in terms of applications, so the first thing, how many sites should I apply to? So this is really going to depend personally on where you want to go. Do you want to stay just in Canada? Are you considering going to the States? In which case you're going to get into the MP RAP application process. Do you want to apply to both Canada and the States? My advice to you is don't burn yourself out with like 20 plus interviews. That's a lot to deal with. And don't only apply to your single dream site. The more interviews you do, the more practice you get. And at this stage, as a grad student, you might not have a lot of interview practice, and it's very valuable. So even by like your 3rd or 4th interview, you really start to get into a rhythm and get more used to it. So I would definitely recommend applying to at least a few sites. And ensure your application meets all the stated requirements. As Heather mentioned, there are, especially in Canada, quite varied requirements. Things like transcripts you might need to have prepared ahead of time. So make sure you know all the things that are required for the application and that you're very organized and making sure that you're meeting those deadlines. And you can always reach out to check your application status if you're unsure, if you're missing something. For cover letters, max 1 page, most important. Do not create an essay. This is basically highlighting your key characteristics of what makes you a fantastic fit for the program. So I would recommend going to the job ad, reading it through very carefully, highlighting what you think are key components that they're looking for, and then include relevant examples in your cover letter of how you meet those criteria. For example, working in a in a multidisciplinary team environment. So in my role as a physics assistant at the Tom Baker Cancer Center, I work closely with physicists, electronics staff, and radiation therapists to coordinate the completion of QA activities and ensure timely return to service. So showing relevant examples that highlight, that show those characteristics. Highlight your personal strengths. So again, using examples. So if there's anything that they weren't maybe mentioning in the cover letter, but you think you excel at, make sure to include that. And make sure you clearly state any required components such as like CampEP programming and Canadian citizenship or permanent residencies, or being a permanent resident. For interview prep, I would recommend looking on Google, just looking up lists of top 20 behavioral interview questions. Identify some consistent themes. There tend to be a lot of like generic questions for these, and then formulate a STAR response for each theme. So STAR is an interview format, so it's looking at the situation, the task, action, and result. So for situation, provide context. For the task, what did you need to accomplish? And then action, how did you solve the problem? What was your thought process? And result, what was the outcome of your actions? And try and focus on the positives. So for an example, so tell us about a time you made a mistake. So during my master's degree, I needed to validate the accuracy of my radiation treatment collision prediction application. So I had a rando phantom set up on one of our Linacs using our SRS immobilization to perform after hours measurements. The measurements went fine, and now I just need to take down the setup. But I realized that the headboard I had just taken off the couch should be in 2 pieces. So as I went to place it back on the couch to figure out how it worked, pieces came apart and the couch attachment fell to the ground and shattered, pieces everywhere. So after overcoming my initial panic, I called the supervisor to let him know what happened, sent an email to the physicists on duty the next morning, warning them that the piece would be missing so that an alternate solution could be found in time for the next treatment, and collected all the pieces to take to our machine shop for possible repair. So in the end, patient treatments were unaffected as we were able to borrow a couch attachment piece from another unit. Unfortunately, the piece I dropped was unrepairable, and it now sits on my desk as a reminder not to touch things unless I know what I'm doing. So for interviewing, I would definitely recommend practicing as much as possible and do this out loud. So whether you do this to a friend, an object, whatever, just really getting practice speaking your answers and making sure that you have a smooth delivery of your answers. So when interviewing, do your homework. Look at the organization. What kind of research does the center do? What are the priorities of the organization? Like as a department, as like a hospital itself, they generally have larger priorities. Look at who is interviewing. Is it a panel? Is it like a couple of physicists? Look into their backgrounds. What kind of research are they doing? What do they think is important? Have your own questions ready, which this talk and Heather's will give you a lot of stuff to think about and provide a lot of questions that you could ask programs in terms of clarifying what their program is like. I would recommend taking notes, so you can kind of take notes as they're asking you the question to just keep yourself on track so you know that you're answering each part of the question. You can also just quickly take notes of what their responses to your own questions are, so you can come back later to these notes when you're ranking and say, how did I feel about that interview? How did I feel about the people that I was meeting? How did I think of their responses and like the general vibe of the program? I would recommend having water, something to hydrate, because you are going to be talking a lot, especially if they're doing like a presentation beforehand as well. And that can give you a second to pause as well while you're taking a drink to think about the question they're asking. And if they're stumped, don't be afraid to ask to maybe come back to the question later. So yeah, you don't necessarily need to just sit there. If you don't have an immediate answer, you can always ask them to come back. So this is more generic, but in terms of the purpose of the interview, everyone applying has the technical requirements for the job. They're coming from a CampEP degree program, but really it's looking at, do you have the soft skills necessary to work in a clinical environment? Are you a nice, reasonable person who's going to get along with everyone there? Are you a good fit for the work culture there, which can vary a lot depending on where the center. So just chatting with the panel, you might get an idea of kind of the work culture. Are you self-motivated? Are you going to be working well in a team and independently to complete the residency on time? Training a resident is a significant investment from the department side of things, where they're putting a lot of time into your training. So they want to make sure that they have someone who's going to complete that on time and do well in the program. But on the other side of it, like programs are also competing for the top candidates. So like realize that you are also important in this process and your opinion matters, and you also have power in this. So don't be too afraid. For interview information, this is probably going to be, if you don't know about this, this is the most important thing of this presentation, the Google Doc. So if this is basically basically a repository of information created by other people applying for the match. So it is filled out by users, so be wary of the information, but a simple way to find it, just go on r/medical physics, search match. And if you find, say, this post, there's a stickied comment which has a link to the document. So on here, you can find everything from past interview formats. So do they do technical questions? Do they have presentations? How long are the presentations? Once people start posting job ads, you can start seeing deadlines for this year, like when do the programs want the applications in by. And once people start applying, you can also see things like the current interview invitation status. So if you are waiting to see if you're going to get an interview along with everyone else, you can see if they have actually sent out anything or if everyone's still just waiting. So now I'm just going to go over briefly some things to consider for residency and medical physics in general. So start date. So generally in Canada, it's a July or September start date. So it's going to really depend on when are you defending, what is going to work for you. And this is specifically for match programs. So do you want to go on vacation in the summer? How long are you going to need to move? Like, are you moving across the country? That's going to take quite a while. Are you going to the States? In that case, you want to think about visas. So when do you need to have all the paperwork completed for your PhD so you can actually get into the States to start your residency, especially if it's a July start, which they usually are. For residency programs, research versus clinical time balance. Some programs are 3 years because they want you to do a full year of research as well as the 2-year residency. So is that something you're interested in? Or like me, coming from a PhD, you just want to have the 2-year residency with maybe a research project, but not a full year of research. What's their involvement in a clinic? So Heather also mentioned this, but how much authority do you get as a resident? Do you get to participate in, say, charts, being a LINAC physicist or a duty physicist, where you're actually going to the units and signing off on things, or are you just purely from a student perspective learning about this? There's a lot of variation in how much participation you have as a resident. In terms of multidisciplinary aspects, do you get to meet with the oncology side of the program? Do you shadow ROs? Do you get to collaborate with RO residents at all? Generally, I would say that the more collaboration you get to see these other disciplines and see what their part in the process is, the better. If there is gaps in the program, such as like maybe they don't have a TBI program or an SRS program, is there availability to go see those gaps at other centers, or do you kind of just have to read about it, which is less useful as a resident? Is it a multi-site program? Do they have satellite centers? As a resident, would you be expected to go to those satellite centers to do QA, like maybe once a month or once a year for an annual? So that if you don't have a car, for example, that could be quite difficult for you to manage. Other things to consider: co-residence. So do you have, for a larger program, you might have co-residents in the same year, which could be nice. You have someone to bounce ideas off of and study with. But are all your rotations shared, or are you just, would you maybe split off for something more specialized, like one of you does SRS, one of you does brachy? So there can be a lot of variation in how much you're sharing with your co-resident, or are you just doing everything together throughout the whole thing? Maybe they have a junior and a senior resident, which is quite common, which is and also nice because you have collaboration and mentoring opportunities there. And it provides like a small community. Or maybe it's just a single resident program, which in this case can be good as well, because you're then the go-to person if anything is happening in the clinic and they're like, oh, we need someone to do these measurements for us. You'll definitely be very qualified by the end of it because you will get a lot of experience, but it could also be exhausting. And the onboarding and training cycle could be very different for a single resident program, where if they at least have junior senior residents every year, they're repeating the same things. So they're going to be quite up to date in how their process is. But if they're not, then it could be 2 years or more between residents where they're doing the training. Another thing to consider for residency and also future career is the center size. So I'm going to make a lot of generalizations. This may not be true for all centers, but it's something to think about for like a larger academic center. Typically, they're affiliated with academic institutions. They're probably going to be research requirements. There'll also be teaching opportunities. You might have graduate students. They have more specialty treatments such as orthovoltage, stereotactic radiosurgery, brachytherapy, total body irradiation, which as a resident, it's very nice to see these things at least once. Like maybe you don't want to do it for your career, but it is good to see these things. They might have a variety of equipment, but they might also have longer clinical hours. They could be treating till 7:30, 8 at night, depending on how busy they are, which means you're starting QA at 7:30 or 8 at night, and it's going to be very late days. Long-term career-wise, if you're in a larger academic center, you tend to have more of a siloed career where you do become like an SRS physicist or a brachyphysicist, and there's less kind of flexibility there in terms of shifting around. If you're looking at like a smaller community center, more general treatments such as prostate and breast, and maybe they have an SBRT program as well. They probably only have like a CT sim and 2 to 4 Linacs. They might have more regular hours at least. So maybe you're typically only doing 9 to 5 and you get the unit for QA earlier. Long-term career-wise, you tend to be more of a jack of all trades physicist where if anything is happening in the clinic, you're going to be the one dealing with it. And you might also have closer working relationships because of the smallness of the center, which could be nice. And that is all I have. So thanks for listening and good luck this year. I have my email here at the bottom if anyone wants to reach out, specifically about residency or the U of T program. I'm happy to answer any questions also for the panel.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for giving such a great overview of residency program and from the residency side. So I know there's a lot of questions from you already, but before that, I would like to introduce our panelists to complete the panel. Dr. Kyle Broma, which he is, yes. So Dr. Kyle Broma is a second-year radiation oncology resident at BC Cancer in Victoria. He's previously completed his PhD at the University of Victoria exploring applications of gold nanoparticles as radiosensitizers. During his PhD, he contributed to publishing 20 papers, some of which were first authored. He helped supervise multiple undergrad co-op students and mentor many graduate level students along the way. In his spare time, he likes to read, work out, play sports like hockey, do stuff in nature like hiking and camping, exploring activities around town like museum and art galleries, hang out with his cats as well. So we'll immediately hop on to the Q&A session with all three panelists, and you're welcome to unmute yourself, raise your hand or put your question in the chat, and we'll ask those for you if that's the case. Yeah.
We can also give our audience some time to ruminate on their questions.
Absolutely.
And him and I can ask a question. I was wondering for both Thomas and Kyle, do you guys have any advice for how to prepare for more technical type of questions?
Yeah, I can go first. I'll give you a break, Thomas, from speaking. So I feel like for most interviews, they won't try and go too technical. You probably won't have to do in-depth TMR calculations or do any inverse square laws. But you will, at least in the interviews I did, I think I had a very similar experience to Thomas. I interviewed across Canada as well. I actually saw Thomas in some of the interviews, especially for Toronto. You will be asked questions about, for example, how a LINAC works and what are some key parts, or how does a patient get treated? Like very general overview questions. So I don't think they'll go too in-depth technical, but some interviews at least, I'm not saying all of them, but some of them will definitely make sure you know at least a little bit about the field before you. So if you do take your CAMPEP residency or CAMPEP grad courses, sorry, and you remember all those, you should be pretty good, I think. What was your experience, Thomas?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. I think if you're applying to the States, some of those programs tend to do a lot more technical questions. In Canada, I would say it's generally maybe one technical question, but a lot more behavioral and situation type questions. And it's, yeah, kind of generic camp ep stuff, like, yeah, how does a LINAC work? I had one, it was like, what's the basic photon interactions, like stuff like that. There's a website, Oncology Medical Physics, which has a lot of really good like summary style information for just medical physics stuff in general. So I would recommend going on that website and maybe just reviewing like for like prep, but
Sure. Thank you so much for answering that question. So we have a question for Heather. So thank you for the great talks, Dr. Warkentin. Could you give an overview of what's expected in a personal statement? What differentiate good from great?
So we don't ask for a personal statement for our medical physics resident applicants, but I also sit on the CARMS interview panel for the radiation oncology residency program. So I have read hundreds and hundreds of personal statements. So I'll just give you my opinion. So basically, you're going to have a cover letter that talks about your fit for the job, as Thomas described. Your personal statement is a little bit more about yourself. It's your opportunity to tell the program a little bit more about your personal interests. It's very obvious when I'm reading them who is sincere and who is writing what they think we want to hear. So you'll see a lot of advice online about a personal statement that's geared at people applying for medical residencies. So they often start with an anecdote about a patient interaction or a family member who's experienced a health crisis and how that inspired you, and like formula going down the page. If you don't have an anecdote like that, that is totally fine. I can tell if you're just stretching to like fill in that box that you think should be a personal anecdote. So if you're interested in medical physics, like for me, I did engineering physics. I thought radiation was cool. I was looking at graduate programs. I was like, wow, you can apply it to the human body. I didn't really know what I was getting into, right? So my personal statement would be about how I thought radiation was really cool. And then I ended up in medical physics. Maybe you were in the robotics club. So just talk about how you got into medical physics, and it doesn't have to pull at the heartstrings. It just has to be sincere. And the one thing I always recommend for medical physics is so much of our job is problem solving. So if you have an anecdote that somehow relates to problem solving, thinking outside the box, even juggling multiple priorities, because that's also a huge part of a clinical medical physicist's day, is getting a phone call while you're trying to do something else and somebody knocking on your door at the same time. Like that's the type of stuff you could bring in to just let them know that you have those skills. And it's also a good place to showcase your personality a little bit. So I personally like it if you talk just a bit about your hobbies, maybe make a joke about your cats, just throw in a little bit of personality. You don't want the whole thing to be a big joke, but just show that you're a real person, show your humanity, and just keep it sincere and honest. That's my biggest advice.
Thank you so much, Heather. I have a question from the chat, not in the public as a DM. So since, like Thomas, you gave a presentation mentioning US visa, do Canadian program accept international applicants, and do they assist with visa outside? Like I guess this is a question from like all
Yeah.
panel.
Yeah, I'll hop in. Generally, it's not that they won't. I know there are some that won't. And then because we're hiring you as an employee in a lot of the cases, then just the general hiring laws apply. So we just cannot take you over a Canadian citizen or permanent resident who's equally qualified. So it's not that we wouldn't help you with a visa, it's that we have so many applicants, we have no reason, like you're never going to be, if I'm just being perfectly honest, more qualified than a Canadian who is applying for the job because we have so many of them. So my advice though is if you are in that situation, it's often easier to get to Canada as a student than as a resident. So there are options in terms of like, I don't want to promote a particular program, but there are some one-year masters out there where you can get that CAMPEP Canadian masters and work towards your immigration process that way without investing too much time.
I'm going to hop in as well. I know personally I'm Canadian, but I know some grad students that are American and have, as Heather said, they started as a grad student and they've worked their way and are working their way towards that permanent residency, but also they get to know everyone in the clinic and it makes it much easier to hire. They already have through the visa process for the grad studies. So that's one way and probably the best way if you're American wanting to enter Canada, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think it would be also possible for them to consult different programs beforehand or visit their website. Yeah, I know it's not easy, but yeah, just to clarify, you can also raise your hand and just unmute yourself. But I'm just going off my list in terms of who raised their hand already. So Julian, you can just unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. Thank you everyone for holding this webinar. Yeah, so my name is Julian McCary. I'm a PhD candidate at McGill University. This is, I guess, a question for both residents and program directors. How important or would it play a role in a resident, an application, a LinkedIn profile, a good up-to-date LinkedIn profile? I wonder how useful that would be. Thank you.
I don't look at it at all, to be honest.
Yeah, personally, I haven't seen any benefit from. No one mentioned LinkedIn or anything. And I think it's good for networking, so it gets you to know people, and especially useful to take advantage of that, especially when you go to conferences during your grad studies. But I'm not sure it helps much in the interview process.
Yeah, I keep my LinkedIn up to date, and like I'll use it to add people at conferences. And I had it on my CV, but I don't think it mattered at all. But
Thanks.
Thanks everyone for those questions. Okay, I'll jump to the chat and then we can jump back to the raised hands. There's a question that says, which is evaluated more heavily in a candidate's background, research, experience, or grad school grades? How highly valued is extracurricular experience, like involvement in organizations like COMP? Is this evaluated at all?
So I don't ask for transcripts, so I definitely don't care about your grad school grades as long as you've completed it. Your research experience is usually relatively important. Have you been publishing at least a bit? Is it relevant to what the program values in terms of maybe you're bringing some special skills that they're looking for? Extracurricular experience is more and more valuable, I think, as we progress through the years. It used to be really like a research profession, and now it's a people profession with a lot of science, obviously. But yeah, I like to see extracurricular involvement in COMP, AAPM, or just your community. Like if you're a soccer coach, that's great too.
Thank you for taking the time to answer that. Daniel, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Those were fantastic talks, really good overviews of the whole residency process. I had a question, sort of a couple small layers to it, but let's say you go through the match. You have ranked your residency programs, 1, 2, 3, but you get interviews at select ones. Maybe they are on your top 3 or not. But you get offered at a residency that you appreciate getting the offer, but maybe it's something that you don't want to go to anymore. In terms of declining an offer and the potential to resubmit to the match, how does that sort of work? Do you have only a select number of times you can actually apply to the match? If I get an offer from a residency program, is this something that I have to accept? I was just hoping you guys can comment on that. Thank you.
So I think the way the match works, and correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, as you obviously went through the match as well, but if you reject the position that you got matched with, you no longer are going to be part of that year's match, as everyone gets matched at the same time. So, but what can happen is that some people do reject, as you mentioned, and then there's positions available, and then you can apply outside the match after. They'll advertise for those positions. So that's one option. I believe it's okay to apply for the match the next year. However, I I'd advise not doing it. It's very competitive, right? The match program is very competitive, and if you're given a position, it's likely a very good position. And I know it can be a little bit if you mention on your resume that you went through the match and then rejected it, people might think that maybe you'll do that to them as well. So there's a couple of things to think about before going to that extreme. You can also, like I said, apply outside the match. For example, Edmonton is outside the match, and they're a very good program. So there's lots of options there, but I think going to that extreme is not necessarily a good idea. But maybe Thomas can comment on that.
Yeah, we had something, it was more just the PhD timeline wasn't going to work out. So a resident ended up not starting residency because of that. I would recommend not doing that. It just doesn't look good. You're probably going to burn bridges with the program, and it is a small community as well. So I just would not recommend doing that. Like, have a realistic expectation of when you're going to finish. In terms of like specifically declining a program, your chance to do that is when you're ranking. So you do all the interviews, and then after that is when the programs rank you and you rank them. If you don't want to go there, just don't rank them. That's all you have to do. And they don't need to know if you've ranked them or not. Like, it's just done. So that's when I would make that decision, not after being matched. Like,
Yeah,
if there's
yeah.
a chance you don't want to go there, don't rank it, because there is not an insignificant probability that you will end up there. So
Yeah, I definitely know that if I would get an offer, I'd probably jump on that immediately and say, hey, I'm not going through this again. I suppose it was more like would it have affected my like chances of another residency? Let's say if there was like a family emergency or like some other thing out of my control that restricted me from actually accepting this resident position, you know, are they understanding of, yes, you know, apply next year. This isn't, you know, we can have this not affect your position. I don't know.
So
But
Daniel, in that sense, I think residencies can often be understanding and delay the start of the residency as well. So that's also an option if it's an actual emergency and not just you don't like the program. I've heard of programs doing that, even like PMH, I've heard doing that before. So
great, thanks guys.
Thank you so much for that question and the answers from the panelists. So I see a hand raised from Vork, if I pronounce your name correctly. Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, you may ask your question.
Oh, thank you all for the good information. I guess, well, actually two questions, because Kyle, you brought up delaying. How does that how would you approach that, requesting like, hey, could I start a little bit later? Is that something that that programs might be open to, or like how would that conversation come up? And actually my the original question I wanted to ask was, when we have letters of recommendations from people we've worked for, typically it's supposed to be some information that's not already there in our CV or not already there in our personal statement. But what kind of things are the reviewers looking for from the references? What kind of I don't know, indicators are they seeking to read through the recommendation letters?
I'll let Heather answer that last part, but as for the delaying, I don't think programs will delay, for example, if you didn't finish your PhD in time. That's just not a reasonable. They'll, depending on how late you are, maybe like a month or two is fine, but if you're finishing in December, it's probably not going to happen. But if it was an actual emergency, I would reach out to the program director and just explain your reasoning, especially if they offered you a job and you're like, hey, listen, sorry, there's a family emergency. I'd love to accept. Just explain yourself. I'm sure Heather can answer that more in depth as well if that's ever happened in Edmonton. I'm not sure, but it's programs you're usually accepting, and if they like you as a candidate, they'll be okay with accepting you.
Yeah, so we haven't had that happen to us, but we've had students from our grad program who have turned down offers with really mixed results. So I had one quite a long time ago who turned down an offer, totally burned the bridges with that program, and they were reluctant to take any of our future students. Another one, I guess one of the problems with the match requiring everything so far ahead of time is when you're doing a PhD, you might have a very clear timeline and you think in 6 months you're going to defend, and that just won't happen. And that is not super uncommon. So we had one student that happened to, and it didn't go well in the match. And then we had another student it happened to, and the program was happy to delay his entry by a few months and still take him. From the program perspective, sometimes it'll just depend on how those positions are defined. Like if it has to be a September or July start date because of the way it's set up in the human resources system, then they might just have to pass you over for somebody else. But if there's some flexibility in when the start date is, then they might be happy to wait. So I honestly, it'll be very unique to each program, but how you communicate with them is what's going to determine whether or not you burn the bridges. So make sure you have a really good reason and you express that. And your second question was about the letters of reference, correct? That one's a bit tricky. So if you're graduating from a master's or PhD, make sure you have a reference letter from your supervisor. Not having one is just a red flag. So make sure you have that. I just look for the ones that I like are the ones that make it clear that the person writing the reference letter really wants to help that person. You get some that are just like, this person is in the top 10% of students I've ever worked with, and it doesn't give you any insight into them. I want to know, do you show up for work on time? Are you pleasant to be around? I don't know. Yeah. It honestly, yeah. I don't have like a formula for that one.
Sorry, I guess to just add the context, I come from a non-medical physics background, just regular physics, and so taking like certificate program courses to complete that. So my advisor for PhD was not medical physics, and just kind of wondering what what content you would look from like a postdoc supervisor or the PhD supervisor, that kind of.
Okay, yeah, that's good context. So we've had 2 residents recently from certificate programs who are in a similar situation. One of them, I did talk to their PhD supervisor because I like to phone them and like just have a chat. And that PhD supervisor actually understood what medical physics was. So we had a good conversation. A lot of the times they don't understand the sort of that clinical element and why we might be looking at more teamwork, personality things rather than just technical skills. The other one, I did not get a reference from his PhD supervisors, just from the certificate program. I'm going to mute myself and have a drink of water.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that answer. Maybe we'll move to Tomaj, who has his hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Thanks everyone for the great information. So I'm a master's student, just started from the States. So I guess I'm a little bit I have some time to start thinking seriously about the applications. But I had two questions. One of them was, what's the weight that's put on the applicant's degree, PhD versus master's? Like, how important is that? Because I think most of you mentioned publication and research, and I'm assuming on average, PhD students will have more output on that front. So yeah, how important is that from the point of view of the interviewer or the program director? And my second question is more relevant to my situation. So as a person who just started a master's program in medical physics, and besides the curricular work that I'm doing, what else can I do to be prepared for the residency, which is about probably 2 years ahead of me? Is there anything I can do besides the grades and networking? So that's all. Thank you.
So there are some differences between Canada and the US in terms of degree. So in Canada, it's very difficult to get a residency without a PhD. And that's really rooted in the fact that most of us are academic centers. So we have graduate programs that we're running out of our medical physics departments, and we need people who can supervise our grad students. I mean, that's really the root cause of it. In the States, there are places that actually do prefer masters. So I was on a panel with somebody who preferentially hires masters into their residency program. So it'll really depend which country you're going to be honest. And in terms of what you can do outside of just getting good grades and networking, if you have a chance to do any hands-on work with the equipment, if they hire students to do part-time work, doing QA and things like that, and participate in things like this and try to get involved in some of the AAPM in particular has a lot of communication, networking, not networking, but soft skills development programs right now that you can get involved in. And so the more of that you do, then the more easily you'll get through that interview process, to be honest, because you'll be used to talking about things other than just science.
Thank you.
I want to add in about the master's or PhD. Take this with it's a bit of a. It was just, I listened to a podcast from AAPM prior to COVID, so it's been a bit of time. But it stated that PhD students across America, this is for AAPM, will likely get a residency 95% of the time, and master's about 50% of the time. So it's still possible to get a residency with a master's, but not as likely with a PhD. And I think that's important to keep in mind whether you decide to go through a PhD or not. There are, as what Heather said, there are programs that do just solely accept masters. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the questions and the answer from the panelists. So I'll hop on to the chat for one brief question. So this person asked, for those who have researched mostly on programming part and AI, I think is referring back to Thomas, is there any chance for doing residency in the clinic? Do you consider this type of applications? And I guess it's asking how easily you see like machine learning and AI in those current landscape of medical physics.
Thomas can expand on this as well, and Heather, of course. But I think if you go to any conference nowadays, half the stuff there is programming AI, and that's a big part of what is expanding in the clinic is using that AI to improve clinical outcomes and reduce workload as well, because there's a lot of things that can be automated. So I think it's very useful. A lot of the field is moving towards automation and using AI. So I think it's a benefit rather than a negative. But
Yeah, my PhD was quite heavy into programming, and yeah, I got a residency, so I don't see an issue with it.
Yeah, I think as long as you've got that CAMPEP stamp on your degree, then the area of research in general, like AI or, I don't know, electrons, whatever, orthovoltage, it doesn't matter a lot. It matters a little bit, but honestly not a lot. And you can spin it anyway, right? So I have people who are worried that they did their research in MRI and they want to go into therapy, but what are we doing in therapy all the time? We're integrating MRI. So having a therapy physicist who understands AI will be, or MRI. I was using an MRI example, but it also applies to AI, who understands these things is really valuable. So somebody who has a deep understanding of AI and can like really understand how to safely apply it, that would be really valuable in the clinic. So I would spin it that way in your cover letter.
It's also kind of a throwback to the last question where even if your residency or your PhD or master's isn't clinically focused, you can try and approach other ways of getting that clinical experience through doing QA through the program, for example. So you can use that to show that you are interested and you have some experience.
Thank you, everyone. We have a question from Amir, who has their hand raised.
Hello, thank you so much for your valuable information that you're spreading. I do have two questions. One about the visas that you mentioned about the Canada versus the States. So I'm considering the other side for the most of the international students that they are doing PhD right now in the Canada, and then they will have the post-graduation work permit visas. I want to see, are they equally considered for the residency programs, or still the PRs and the citizens of the Canada are preferred over the people that they already have the work visas for the Canada? And the question two goes back to the kind of the thing that you earlier just mentioned for the imaging versus therapeutic background. I just want to add another thing, that is the clinical experience in the imaging side, like nuclear medicine QAs and those stuff, transferable to the medical physics therapeutic residency program or not? Thank you.
So Amir, I don't honestly know the answer to your first question. I wouldn't want to say, because I don't know the facts about the differences between the work permits and the visas. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that one. For your second question, yeah, I would definitely think that any experience doing QA in imaging or therapy for either type of residency program, imaging or therapy, would be valuable. That would be my take on it.
Thank you so much. Any guidance on how can I get some information about it to see, should I prepare for the residency application, or I should consider first doing a postdoc and then going for residency program?
Are you in a CAMPEP graduate program?
Yes.
And you're doing nuke med type research, you said? Is that
Yes.
correct? And do you want to apply for imaging or therapy residency?
Therapy.
Yeah. Postdocs, I think they're not required.
No, I mean, just
So
for doing postdoc just before getting the PR in Canada. That's what I'm planning
I don't
to
know.
do. Oh,
Yeah. Like there's nothing, I would say I'm pretty neutral on that one. Like if you think it's going to give you valuable experience that will add to your application and give you more time to get your like Canadian residency requirements sorted out, then yes, it's definitely not going to be a negative on your application. So if it's going to end up being a positive for you individually, because everybody's got a different situation, then I would definitely not discourage you from doing it. Like there's, yeah, it's a very personal thing.
I can add a little bit to the American thing in that I know many people who've gotten residencies in America from Canada, and I don't think America prioritizes. I can't verify that. It might be state dependent as well. It might be institution dependent. So if you want to really know for sure, I'd reach out to the ones that interest you. And the PEC QA as well has a lot of overlap with other types of QAs. Imaging QA is very similar across the field, so it's good to have that. Also, a lot of American residencies also have a I think Thomas mentioned that could have a 1-year postdoc to start with, and then you rotate into residency. So if that's what interests you, America could be a good option for that.
Thank you so much. We'll jump to the question in the chat, which is very brief about, is it common to include an additional reference letter focused on a person's character as part of the residency program?
No. Short answer. No, not
Definitely.
really. Yeah, like it should be kind of rolled into your other reference letters, but we don't need a character reference specifically.
I see. I appreciate the answer.
Well, that was quick. So let's move to Matthew, who has had their hand raised for a while.
Hey everyone. Yeah, my name is Matthew Muscat. I'm a PhD candidate here at UBC Okanagan and BC Cancer in Kelowna. I just had a quick question about, I'm in my final year of my PhD, and I'm trying to organize in my mind, like, what's most important to consider by residency application deadlines. So in my last year of my PhD, I'm focused on publishing all of the research that I've been doing. So I guess I'm just wondering what your opinion is if you were in my shoes, trying to publish papers, how important is it to publish by a specific time? I mean, obviously before you finish your PhD, I mean, that's a given. I mean, like by the time you apply for residencies and, when they're looking at your application, is it enough to just have papers submitted, not necessarily accepted? Like how should I go about thinking about this?
Do you already have papers published?
At this point in time, no, I don't.
It will depend on the program. I would like to see that you've had papers at least accepted, even if they haven't, because the publication process can be long, right? So I would like to see maybe at least one accepted in a high quality journal and then a couple in the submission process. I would find it unusual to have no accepted or published papers coming out of a PhD program applying, to be honest. So, and I know you have to put in your applications well ahead of time. And the other thing is I would like to see some sort of like in the reference letter you submit, say from your supervisor, if they can sort of back you up and say, these are really in progress, these are accepted, you know what I mean? So it's not just on your CV, but they also kind of back it up. And then also I'd like to see from them that they kind of verify that your targeted graduation date is realistic. Because they sometimes are the ones making it drag out. So you might think it's realistic and they aren't in as much of a rush as you. So it's good to have them backing it up.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. Also, I had one more quick question. I remember being shown like a Google sheet of a bunch of residency information. Was that the Google Doc that was mentioned at the beginning? Okay, great.
I would assume so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. I just want to make sure I could find that. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you for the answers. And we'll jump to Robert, who has his hand raised.
Thank you very much for your great presentations and then trying to help us through navigate as we climb our academic career. I have two questions. Number one, I am an international student studying in the States, so I'm not so much familiar with this residency stuff, but I've been reading much on it on the Campus website, trying to get a deeper understanding about it. I have two questions now. I wanted to find out, what should be the length of my CV if I'm supposed to add a CV to my application? How many pages of my must my CV be? Because I know there are a ton of applications that you get each year. So if I put in a lot of maybe information about me in my CV, you may not get all the time to read it. So if I'm to try and reduce the length of my the number of pages that I have on my CV? What should be the maximum number of pages that would be enough? And my second question is, whilst talking about PhD, can someone be in a residency program, seeing that most of these residency programs are affiliated to universities? Is it possible for someone to be on a residency program with the master's and then translate to a PhD? Is it possible to do that? These are the two questions that I want to ask. Thank you.
So for your second question, in Canada, honestly, no. Like, you want to have finished your terminal degree by the time you go into your residency. I think I can't think of anybody who would do that combo PhD residency that you're suggesting. So, but maybe in the States, because there's just so many more programs there and a lot more variety in how they're set up. So I can't say no across the board, but in Canada, I can't see it happening. In terms of your CV, I can't give you a page limit. I would say like in the 3 to 4 pages, maybe. It'll depend on how long your reference list is, but I don't need your photograph. I don't need to know about your marital status. I know in some countries it's normal, like in France, you always put a photograph, you always put your marital status and some family information. In North America, you don't need to do that, so that saves you some space. You just give us your education, make sure you specify that it's a CAMPEP program right at the top, and we're pretty, we still have a little bit of like an academic mindset when we're looking at your CVs, to be honest. So education, work experience, if you've been a TA, something like that, teaching, and then some relevant skills. Like if you have done QA on Linux, put a little bit about that, put a little paragraph about your research project and how it might apply to the clinic. Yeah, that. So it doesn't have to be very long, but I wouldn't go past 4 pages. Shorter would be better, but if it's too short, then we're not getting enough information. So there's that balance you have to strike.
For the CV, I'm just talking about my personal experience. Thomas can maybe expand on his, but mine was about 3 pages, and it's very short and succinct. You can make up for the longer page length, longer 3 pages, with just being right straight to the point with what you've done. I've done this QA. These are the papers I published. These are the scholarships I got. This is the PhD. This is the degree I have. Just very short, bullet point. Use strong words. Don't write paragraphs or anything on the CV.
Thank you. I'm grateful.
Thanks, Kyle and Heather. There's a message from Andrew, a really good question that says, what strategies could prospective residency applicants use when navigating residency fairs? How could we make a good impression if we go to a booth for a program that we're intent on highly ranking in the match process or applying directly to?
So this is actually relevant because I will be taking part in a residency fair in the next couple weeks. For me, I'd be looking for an applicant that is asking a lot of questions, is curious about the program, about what we're offering, and what type of atmosphere they might be working in. I keep getting told this by the previous resident that was before me that over 50% of the job is communication and teamwork, right? So you need to be able to kind of show that you're capable of that through being friendly, but also asking questions about like who can you reach out to, who would have information that you might be interested in. Asking for contact information might be useful as well to keep in contact, because residency applications might not be for they're within the next 3 to 6 months, but you might not remember your name. So having contact information to just email so people's name is constantly in their mind is quite useful as well. I don't know if Thomas or Heather can expand, but yeah.
Yeah, I'd say if it's somewhere you really want to go, like make sure you've done a little bit of research beforehand. So you're not asking like the basic questions that are just like available through their presentation, whatever that they have on a laptop on their booth. And yeah, try and chat with them, maybe get their information, maybe try and set up like a site visit. Like that could be, if you were able to do that, that could be really good to like actually get some face-to-face time. It might not work depending on how busy they are, but I know I've toured a few cancer centers where I just reached out to them and say, hey, I'm going to be in town and I would love to see and maybe meet a few of your physicists. And it has worked out before. So
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for its question, and definitely getting your face into the public is definitely very important. So I have a question in the chat. So before I jump into the question, and she's providing a context, which I have a very similar situation. So this person, she's planning to graduate by August 2025, although she had hoped to apply for the residency program this year. She decided to finish her PhD and apply next year instead. So do you have any advice or suggestion on someone in her situation can use this gap year to strengthen their application for a match? For example, getting into the industry or like pursuing a short postdoc.
I think those are both great ideas. And I think that your plan to finish your PhD first is a really good one. We just took a certificate student into our program who did a short postdoc, and it actually really strengthened his application because his PhD, because he was a certificate student, wasn't in medical physics. Then he did the certificate, and then he did 6 or 8 months working in a radiotherapy application for his postdoc. So he that was a lot of really valuable experience because the certificate's so short, right? You don't get to immerse yourself as much. So either one of those would be good. You might find it easier to find a short postdoc, but if you work in industry, that's also really great. So I encourage you to do either one.
Thank you so much, Heather. I will, well, considering since Heather is like unmuting yourself, so a question for you. So you mentioned the importance of your support network during residency. How much choice do you have in terms of location of residency, for example? How likely is it to stay in a particular province?
That'll depend on the province because we have such a variation in the number of positions available. So, and it also depend on you. So we've had residents because we graduate more PhD students in Edmonton than we have residency spots. And we had people who wanted to stay here because of family connections, no matter what. And they did 2 or 3 years of research while they waited for that residency position to come around. So that was a personal choice they made, and it delayed that MCCPM hurdle for them. It didn't really delay their career overall because they were doing research in medical physics while they waited, but it did delay things. So like if you want to stay in, say, Ontario, you might be lucky because there are so many spots available. Same with like Quebec also has quite a few spots, right? But if you want to stay in, say, Alberta, you're not going to have as many spots to choose from. And so statistically, you're less likely to be able to stay.
Nice. Thank you so much for that question. I do have a follow-up point, I guess, for the whole panel, is also from Heather, a presentation. Sorry for asking too many. It's about in terms of supporting the resident in terms of preparing for their CCPM exam. Like that as a general, what kind of questions can we ask as like an applicant for the program to better understand the workplace or the environment in general? What question you expect people to ask so that it highlight your program a little bit more?
For me, when it comes to preparing for the MCCPM exam, the written is pretty straightforward in terms of preparation. I don't, like you've all done graduate degrees, you know how to study for a written test. In my opinion, the program can offer you more support in preparing for the oral exam by doing lots and lots and lots of mock oral exams with you that are in that format, because the type of exam that you might be doing throughout the residency, they might be digging deep into questions and asking you lots of follow-up, whereas for the CCPM, the hardest part for a lot of people is answering succinctly and still getting all their points in. And that is a learned skill. You're not going to be able to do it without a lot of practice. So depending on your situation, like say you graduate in September, your oral exam's not till May. It will depend on what type of job you have in the meantime. So if you get lucky and you get a job in a program that's like your permanent job in a place that's going to support you with that mock oral practice, then you got lucky. But I think it's good for the residency programs to also offer that support. It's different for me because I keep my residents here until they finish their exam. So we do a lot of practice with them. So I would just ask them straight up, like, do you offer any practice orals specifically for the CCPM oral exam? I don't think there's any problem asking them that question.
Yeah, I think if I was to ask something like that now, if I was interviewing, I would definitely ask, like, what is your process of examinations throughout the residency? Is it beneficial for the CCPM? Because I know, for example, here in BC, and I'm pretty sure about PMH, I'm not sure about Sunnybrook, but they do oral exams quite often. In BC, we do oral exams that are specifically tailored after the CCPM. So you can ask questions like that. They don't do support, for example, after you graduate, unless you get a job here in BC. But during the residency, which will be a lot of the match programs, you can ask questions like that. What specifically are you looking for during examinations, and what will it help me in the future? Not specifically that wording, but yeah.
Yeah, the U of T program does a lot of oral girl sessions. So throughout the year, we'll do tutorial sessions with that are like whiteboard sessions where the physicists ask you questions on a topic and you have to answer as best as you can. And then we also have a first year exam and a final end of residency exam that are both oral as well in the same kind of similar format to the CCPM. So yeah, kind of lots of practice, which is good because like you just have to keep practicing. There's definitely an art to not saying too much,
Yeah,
but also saying the right thing.
Especially since a lot of the exams, at least here in BC, tend to be online. So it's just having someone stare at you while you're trying to. It's having that pressure. It's good to go through before the actual CCPM, I think.
Thank you, everyone. There's one more question. We're going to take this as our last question, and then we'll wrap up the session. It's from Connor Smith, and it says, what are some common application pitfalls which might cause someone to not even get an interview?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, like if you email me and you're not polite, you probably won't get an interview. That's like the big one for me. And if you come from a program that we're not familiar with and it's not on the CAMPEP website and you don't say that it's a CAMPEP program, then you can miss your chance on an interview for sure. That happened once before to us.
I think I've been told throughout or after the interview process is that if you've done your CAMPEC courses and you're aware of medical physics, they can teach really anyone to do the clinical work. It's just about whether they can get along with you. So if you don't show, as Heather says, like proper respect, or you're kind and you get along with people, I think you have to make sure that you come off as likable and not too pompous or anything. You want to look like you can work in a team. Yeah.
Thank you so much for those great answers. We really appreciated that. So I guess I'll wrap up the session. I do want to thank all of our speakers who came today. I know you have to take time out of your busy schedules, so thank you so much for taking the time. So if everyone could give them like a round of applause, which I know is virtual. Next, we do want to give a little advertisement for our next upcoming session, which today we did talk a lot about the value of networking. So next month on October 16th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, the Canadian Medical Physics Student Council and the American Medical Physics Student Council are working together to do a joint networking session. So this has industry professionals from both countries, and we're covering all the different career paths that you could possibly do with medical physics, whether that be therapy, imaging, academia, or industry. We've got people from all over the country from a variety of institutions, and I highly recommend, whether you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your career, or if you just want to meet some really exciting people, this is a really great event to attend. So there's a QR code that's up there, but these ads will also be posted all over both Student Council's social media. So check that out. And again, a huge thank you to everyone who showed up today. Thank you to the audience for all your amazing questions. We really appreciate it. And again, a huge thank you to all of our panelists. So let's give them a round of applause. Thanks, everyone.